Welcome to the webinar again, everyone. Today, appreciate your time with us. I am Russell Wilkinson, the North American Partner Solutions Architect, working with both partners like Performetrics as well as Akamas on integrating our solutions into their services practices as well as their integration points with other technologies. As you can tell, I'm the odd man out here. I don't have a great Canadian accent like Donna, nor do I have an Italian accent or a Polish accent, so you get Southern redneck here. So my apologies, but the fun part is I'm probably the fast talking of the three, which is kind of an oxymoron, but I'll do my best to slow down. Don will keep an eye on the questions for me and keep me honest and keep me straight. But actually, it was a great segue because as Andrew was talking, we talked about continuous testing as well as continuous monitoring, and these things are very tightly coupled together. Going a little bit off script here real quick, so give me a second, because so we talked about the continuous testing and validation that Akamas is bringing to market. Now we're going to talk about that continuous monitoring and baking this into every aspect of your application modernization strategy, especially as you go down that DevOps roadmap towards a new application architecture, deployment scenario, management scenario, et cetera. So with that being said, let's kind of jump into, I've got a few slides I want to talk about, and then just like our friends at Akamas, I'm going to do a demo and walk through the platform as well. So just to step back real quick, who is Dynatrace? So we are the #1 intelligent and automated observability platform on the market. We've been around for a number of years, but the current iteration of our solution, which was specifically designed for enterprise cloud environments and running at web scale, the largest of the large, it's been around for about 7 years. The nice part about our solution, though, is regardless whether it was the old legacy Appmon or it's the new current Dynatrace platform itself, we've continued to maintain our lead in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for intelligent observability. We've got well over, this slide can be continually updated as far as the number of customers we have here. And while every vendor does have one of these slides, the one thing I want to highlight here real quick is the diversity of the use cases for these customers. For example, SAP, if you are a Hybris or Commerce Cloud customer, by default, you're an SAP customer because they needed a platform that could scale to the size that they needed to support, in essence, what is kind of an MSP type relationship they have with their customers. Walmart tried for years to roll their own. They're a very technically advanced company, especially when it comes to the logistics and the software stacks that they've wrapped around that. And they thought, hey, we've done all this other house stuff in-house. We can go ahead and roll out an APM solution using open source tools or our own development cycles. And after 2 years, they gave up and said, nope, we're just going to go with Dynatrace. Whereas then with Kroger is yet a different use case, which really ties back into this, which is around automating pipeline deployments and automating those quality gates that we talked about a couple of times earlier today. And they've been able to reduce, I believe it's by 75%. I'll pull up a slide a little bit later on, but by 75%, they've been able to reduce the amount of manual touch points they needed in their code development as part of that automated pipelines, and having us turn around and help validate that along with another suite of tools to make that a continuous deployment pipeline. One last thing on here, and I like to feature this part out being the technology half of the Donna Russell show, which is that we have 25 releases per year. We have gone in all in ourselves on DevOps and these modern application architecture. We used to be a legacy waterfall-based software development lifecycle approach to our solution, where we came up with 2 major releases per year and occasional little patches and fixes along the lines that our customers had to deploy. Well, being a SaaS offering that can deploy either in a true cloud or on premises as well, we have 7 SREs that are responsible for those 3,000 customers and 5,600 clusters around the world that are running in various environments. And they're able to seamlessly push out 25 releases per year, once every 2 weeks like clockwork. And if you're wondering, well, wait a second, Russell, there's 26 weeks in a year, or 20, it should be 26 weeks based on 52 weeks in the year. That's because we do give them off the end of the year, a couple weeks in there to go out and celebrate the holiday season. So they do skip the end of the year release. But let's step back real quick and talk about monitoring versus observability, because this is very important as you kind of look into modernizing your application stack, because this is going to get to be more complex than even what I'm going to be showcasing here. So when you think about monitoring is those legacy applications that are point solutions specifically designed for that particular technology. For example, I spent years at VMware, and of course, we had our vCenter statistics. And our pseudo parent company, EMC at the time, had all their tools for the EMC storage arrays. And Cisco had their tools monitoring the network. And then you had Windows with their tools monitoring their operating systems, et cetera. And really, each of these tools is excellent in and of themselves, but what they really resulted in was a 2 o'clock in the morning war room if something were to happen, and because we're all using our own tools to prove our mean time to innocence. Basically, how quickly can I pass the buck to EMC and say, sorry, guys, it was your fault on there because you can't monitor slow drain. So I'm going to shout that and run out of the room and let you go out and try to defend yourselves. So the industry really tried to modernize, and we went along with them when we rolled out Dynatrace. We were the first to market with observability, which is saying, hey, let's grab those metrics, those raw CPU feeds, disk, network, et cetera, those things that are great for building huge and fabulous dashboards with showing charts and graphs. But at the end of the day, really aren't contextual. So we sprinkle in a little log analytics as well. So now we've got, oh, I saw a spike on the CPU. Did something show up in the logs at the same time? Is there a correlation possibly between those two? Well, correlation can be somewhat of a fallacy because if you look and if you ever go out to spuriouscorrelations.com, you can go out and find out that it turns out the average consumption of margarine in Maine is directly correlates to the amount of the divorce rate in Maine. But we know those two things shouldn't, or at least hopefully aren't connected together. So finally, the last piece of the puzzle is to add in traces. And so that says, wait a second. So since Giuseppe's, I can see him in my little screen on the side over here. So Giuseppe turns around and goes to his banking front end and says, ooh, I need to make a deposit. He takes the picture with his camera, deposits his check, and then he takes that and transfers it from checking into savings or moves it over into wealth portfolio because it was a really big check. He had a really good year. We can see those traces, those transactions, all those service to service calls that went on. But there's a problem with just base observability and monitoring. You're still at the end of the day stuck in that 2 o'clock in the war room. But the problem is that when you go to observability, if you do not have AI built into this, getting back to the agenda at hand, which is how does AIOPS play into this, you're still have a massive manual effort with a ton of noise. And ultimately, sorry for reading a slide, but I think it's too important. No root cause. You don't know what's really going on, let alone what's the full extent of it. So ultimately, you're still stuck trying to discern all of this data that's being presented to you at scale, even more data than you ever had before, but you're still no closer to fixing it. So we've got to have a better way. We need automation and intelligence. First of all, we've got to have AI assistants baked into the solution. We've got to get to proactive answers and away from just dashboards. Dashboards are great. They're very powerful. They can show a lot of data. But when it comes to identifying root cause and seeing what the issue is, a dashboard is just data on glass. So we need proactive answers. We've got to have continuous automation baked into this. As you turn around and move from that legacy mainframe-based environment and go to a container-based application architecture, or even a step further and go to a serverless environment, you've got to turn around and find a way to have the observability code, the monitoring code baked into this so that it comes along and gets out of the way. And so you don't spend your time monitoring the environment. Monitoring is just a native aspect of the environment you've deployed. It's got to be able to adapt real time to any changes that are being made, especially when you start going to microservices, as containers spin up, as you scale horizontally as well as vertically in your environments. You need something that can keep up and provide intelligent observability, not just a simple little, oh, you've got a service over here that's running. Last two things. First of all, it's also got to be cross-team collaborative. It's one thing to say, oh, it's the server admins, it's the storage admins, it's the network admins, but you need a consistent tool so that everybody's looking at this from the same perspective, but everybody has the data that gives them the insight they need to this. But it's not just about the technology. When we get into things like banking, it's how well are the applications helping achieve their expected business outcomes. Andrew put up a great slide. I believe, Andrew, it was you that was put it up there, which showed that for every extra second a page load happens, you lose 10% of your audience, or you see a continual aggregation of the frustration scores that those users happen to have. So it's about making sure that the business teams can see how well these applications are meeting the performance objectives from a business perspective. And then lastly, it's about understanding the end user experience. How are they being affected by this? Is this a UI issue? And most APM tools, or I'll just say it this way, APM tools can't turn around and tell you where a user is struggling with the UI. You need a solution that gives you that end user perspective and also is able to extract those business analytics of how they're using the applications. So that way it's not just how well was it optimized from a code level, it's how well was it optimized from an application architecture perspective with regards to the click paths the users are taking. So ultimately, that's what our platform comes into play. We are a software intelligence platform that takes those metrics, logs, and traces we talked earlier, but sprinkles in the topology, the user behavior. It integrates with the code, pulls in statistics from the network as well as metadata, and any number of other open source solutions. In fact, over 560 supported technologies we can ingest. And then from that, we have 6 key pillars that we were able to deliver on, everything from infrastructure monitoring to application performance monitoring, but also business analytics and digital experience. And then our latest 2 pillars, application security, and the one we'll spend a little bit of time here on today, which is cloud automation. How does that come into play from your monitoring platform? And of course, a very rich ecosystem so that solutions like Akamas can very seamlessly tie into this and make a cohesive platform across both solutions with the expertise brought on by somebody like Performetrics helping you operationalize those components. So before I get into the demo, some things I want to quickly highlight. So ultimately, the goal here is to help your business objectives, either one, operate more efficiently, so your operations team, classic APM, or innovate faster with higher quality, those developers and what they're doing about enhancing the applications. And then finally, delivering better business outcomes more consistently, making sure that the chief marketing officer, the chief revenue officer, et cetera, are meeting their goals. So what do we mean? Last 3 sides. 1, what do we mean by operate more efficiently? Well, it's about modernizing your operations using automation so that way you can get away from running the business and getting to driving the business through innovation. How do we do this? Well, we allow you to turn around and help migrate those legacy applications more quickly and confidently. So I'll show that in the demo here. We'll talk about our discovery model and how you can turn around and use the data that we gather to then target what can be upgraded the most quickly and with the least impact in the environment. But also it's about recovering from incidents faster. That shift right capability, which says, ooh, we detected something in production that's causing an issue. How quickly can we fix that? And can we even automate that? Can we get humans out of the picture completely from this? So allowing us ultimately to innovate more and operate less. When it comes to innovating faster with higher quality, it's about being able to confidently deliver on innovation so that we can gain that competitive edge. Earlier on, Joseph was talking about those legacy bank environments versus the modern ones. He made me feel really old because he said, back in the 90s when I went in to create my bank account, and I'm like, oh, crud, I was in the 80s, but that's a different issue for a different day. But that being said, I would never even, as a Gen Xer, would never have the patience to open up a bank account now like I did back then, because that's just not what I expect. All I want to do is grab my phone, go to a bank site and say, hey, I need to create a wealth management portfolio. Let me in. Here's my money. Take it as quickly as possible. And if you can't deliver on it, somebody else can. So we want to make sure that we can more confidently and with higher quality increase the frequency of the releases and those changes, but also tying security into this as quickly as possible, because that's critical to everything we're doing. And then lastly, it's about turning around and driving better business outcomes. So the other thing we'll talk about and showcase today is how do we turn around and use the data we gathered to make better decisions and faster decisions by the business around design and hopefully increasing our digital conversion rates. So ultimately, these are measured returns that we can get, and that Performetrics will work with you to make sure that you can effectively track and use to really understand the ROI. So that being said, I'm going to step back and pause, take a breath, make sure Donna didn't have any questions in there that she wasn't able to get a word in edgewise, and switch over and do a quick demo of our platform. Okay, so this is a Dynatrace environment. We call this a tenant. A tenant is a isolated environment that that a customer has, or it could be a segment within a customer. Maybe you want to do your production environment separately from your pre-production, et cetera, et cetera. But the point here, this is the demarc point for our environment. This is a SaaS-based instantiation of our solution. So running in the cloud, it can run anywhere you want to. But ultimately, it starts with turning around and deploying one agents out into the environment that you need to turn around and monitor. And these one agents can run on everything from Windows to Linux to AIX or Solaris or ZOS, including container platforms, Kubernetes, Azure Web Apps, Cloud Foundry, Tanzu, et cetera. They're out there. There's also any number of other ways we can ingress data into here. But the point here that I want to drive is that all of this can be automated. We want to bake this into your delivery pipelines for your infrastructure. And we want to roll it out as quickly as possible. Going back to Walmart, 20,000 hosts over a week that they were able to instrument. SAP, 8,000 hosts over a weekend while the guy was actually running the grill at a family barbecue for their initial deployment. But this is codified. So therefore, we can build this into your networking as code, operating systems as code, monitoring as code comes along for the ride. Once we've turned around and instrumented this, now we start to see the AIOPS kick in from a discoverability perspective. So now I start to see those metrics we talked about earlier, CPU statistics, memory statistics, NICs, disks, et cetera. And from there, I can now start to see the processes that are running. There was talking earlier about optimizing your applications. For example, I believe the demo that Giuseppe and Luca were doing was around Java. So if we go into one of these Java processes, now I can see what services are delivered out there. And now I can see the performance they're providing. So now I can feed that telemetry back into their platform so they can tell you whether you're getting better performance out of that upgrade or not. Ultimately, once this discovery is done, and this happens in hours, if not potentially tens of minutes, depending upon the environment that you're instrumenting and the amount of connections that you currently happen to have, we will now start to see a visual representation of the applications that you have instrumented, starting with those hosts, et cetera. So from here, now I start to see, for example, here's a Node.js based application running in Azure. So I see this called the Azure Weather Express service that's running on Node.js that's sitting on a Windows host inside of East US2 Azure region. So I now have automatically discovered where this service sits in my environment, but also what other services is this service dependent on, both inbound and outbound? Now, where is this extremely valuable? Let's go back to that legacy application we talked about earlier, where we said, hey, we want to turn around and migrate away from a legacy stack and into a container-based. Well, going back to that Java process running on that host, I've automatically discovered those services. So you can see here, I've got 14 distinct services all running in Java on one host. To paraphrase Jeff Foxworthy, for those of you all in the Southern US, this might be a good opportunity to go look and say, hey, I'd like to turn around and turn those into containers. That way I can decouple them and have each one of them have their own development lifecycle around it. Because right now, if I update the Journey service, I've got to do a UAT around configuration, booking, authentication, and verification, amongst others, every time I make a code change. That's not the way you are agile, nor deliver more rapid innovation to your customers that are wanting to use your banking applications. Now, ultimately, why are we using this? Well, first and foremost, going back to that AIOPS capability, the first and foremost thing that we're looked at for is turning around and detecting problems in the environment. So I'm just going to set my time filter to for all the applications I've instrumented in this environment. I can see here since last night, all the issues that have occurred in this environment. And there's quite a few in here. So as we dig into these, here's one where I see this one's a pretty big one. So I'm going to pick on that one because might have some more interesting stuff in it. So we pull up this problem ticket. So we don't generate alerts. what we generate are problem tickets, and these problem tickets encompass or contain all the alerts we would have had. So in this case, I see there was one application, 10 services, and one host that Davis only analyzed a mere 53 billion dependencies. And what she was able to do is not just tell us the extent of the issue, what was affected, she was able to tell us who was affected. So now, as a bank, I know that was always one of the things that when I worked in the financial services industry is understanding the financial impact to us when we had an outage. Who was impacted? We could never see that before. Well, now, because Davis stitches on that end user observability in addition to that application performance monitoring, now we know there were 284 users, and I'm even able to deliver and drill down in on those users. I see the applications. I can discern information, for example, like maybe it's an issue with Google Chrome versus Internet Edge. Maybe it's Windows users versus OS X users. Maybe it's users in users in Italy versus Winnipeg versus the United States. Is it geolocated? If you want those alerts, if you want to scroll through and see those, we can definitely show those as well. But the bigger picture, though, is ultimately what was impacted, where was it direct cause and effect, not just correlation of events. And let's come back and say, okay, what is root cause? Well, the root cause was response time degradation with the easy travel customer front end. That's ultimately what impacted all of these cascading service calls that stemmed out of that. And now we can give you that down to the code level visibility of what was going on. So in this case, it was calls to another service as well as code execution. And on that code execution, I could even drill down into the hotspot, and I'm not going to do it today, but I could even drill down into the line of code that ultimately was causing that issue. So now I know all I have to do is go back and find out who owns that customer front end service and give them the data they need to go back and quickly fix it. Or if we've truly shifted right and tied in automation, we could turn around and actually potentially fix the issue using automation tools by having the appropriate scripts that are being created inside of there. So the last thing I want to talk about here real quick before I pass the ball back is how do we then stitch the end users into this? How do we understand their experience when working with this new digital enterprise that we're presenting up as, we try to get away from going into the bank and just sitting here at our offices in Memphis, Tennessee? Well, in this case, as I mentioned earlier, this problem ticket had 230 some odd users. I specifically said, hey, I want to know the users that were impacted by that were trying to come into this web front end to our application. So our application is easy travel. So think Expedia, Travelocity, et cetera. And so now I can turn around and say, you know what? I want to look at one other filter. I believe this one might work. It's a live demo. So you live by the demo and die by the demo. And I want to say, hey, I don't have any replay sessions. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to turn around and get out of this and say, hey, I'm more interested in just knowing session replay. Yes. I wasn't worried. I'm just curious. I want to see, we'll go pick on Monica. We're an international audience here, an international cast of characters that are presenting to you. So we're going to go to Germany today and find, here's one of Monica's sessions that was affected by this. So now I can turn around and say, hey, as Andrew mentioned earlier, you want to see where you had that 1 second load time that ultimately caused a performance score that wasn't satisfactory. Well, now I can see the waterfall analysis of her session and see what those load events look like. When could she start to interact with the website, et cetera, and where were the errors occurring? And if you want to know how it affected her, we can turn around and go find those sessions and replay them back in real time. Or, I've skipped an activity, so it's going to be a little faster in real time to see how she interacted with the application and how the ultimate performance challenges being presented by the customer front end affected her navigation of the application. So again, all the way from just a simple little piece of software, we distribute out rapidly throughout the environment using automation. At that point, everything else I showed you here today was fully automated, all based on an AI engine we have at the core to our platform called Davis. And ultimately, that's what solutions like Akamas are feeding off of, is taking that telemetry we're providing and then turning around and enhancing what they're doing from an optimization perspective as you look to turn around and deploy more of your basic services to the cloud and present them out to your users as your new digital interfaces. So that being said, I'm going to pause right there and check and pass the ball back to Donna and Cruz, see if there's any questions, or if not, then we can just kind of take it back to the roundtable.
I did have a question come through LinkedIn for
Yes.
you, Russell. One was about the session replay that you had just walked through. Are you actually recording the video of somebody interacting?
So good question. Well, actually, I'm sorry. Rule 101 when you're presenting is don't qualify questions. They're all good questions. That is not an MP4 like recording. So sometimes we call it like a DVR like recording. It's not really an individual file that I can turn around and email to you and say, hey, look at this user session. And then it ends up on TikTok. This is actually a recreation of her session. So we captured all of her interactions in that with these applications. So I know what she clicked on. I know what pages she loaded. I know when she did a mouse over or a refresh, and we're basically recreating that in a read-only like experience. So that way we're not actually redoing her clicks and booking travel for her a second time, but we are turning around and recreating that session using the artifacts that we've cached behind the scenes.
Fantastic, thank you, Dan. And the second question isn't around the unbelievability around the one agent. Where could somebody go learn more or experience the Dynatrace platform?
We do have, anybody can go to dynatrace.com, sign up for a SaaS trial, and Performetrics will work with you in kind of a POC type environment. In fact, we are a very heavily POC focused organization. We believe in the value of them because more often than not, customers find issues in their application stack that they didn't even know they had within the first 2 hours of installing into even a very limited set of environments. So that's just one. Two, we do have a new marketplace / technology environment called the Hub. So if you go to dynatrace.com/hub, then you can turn around and see all of the different technologies we integrate with and whether or not these are API-based integrations or one agent delivered integrations. From the one agent, though, specifically, the easiest thing I'm just going to showcase here, you can drill through the hub and go through there. But what we mean by a one agent, and what a lot of vendors suffer from, is that when they push their agents out there to instrument the application stacks or the technology stack sitting on the host or inside the environments, depending what you're going against, you have to decide, ooh, this host has Java, that host has Nginx, this host has Node.js, that one has 2 of them, and you get into a nightmarish licensing model and supportability model from an agent perspective. Every single one of our one agents, regardless of platform, meaning Windows, Linux, ZOS, Solaris, AIX, etc., every single one of them supports every single technology you see listed here. So if that technology is detected where you're instrumenting using Dynatrace, that integration happens automatically without any other additional configurations you have to put into place. So, but first and foremost, definitely go to the hub, check out the Software Intelligence Hub and everything it is that we support here, from either a mainframe legacy environment all the way through the latest and greatest from Amazon and Azure around serverless functions.
Plus, of course, Acamus and Performetrics are both in that hub, which is awesome.
Oh, yes.
And that's a great segue for the rest of the team. Opening it up here. Just looking to see if we've got any more Q&A and chat questions. I'm not seeing any. Keep me honest here, team.
I'm not seeing any either, but that's just because everyone's just so wowed that my accent was so much more exotic than everybody else's that they don't know what to say right now.
Fantastic. Well, this has been a lot of fun. I want to thank all of our friends, both at Acamus and Performetrics, for having us together today. Certainly want to repeat this over and over and over again for any folks that may be interested. I welcome and invite any of the attendees to provide us your feedback, certainly via any of the ways in which you came to come to this webinar today. Would love your thoughts around additional sessions that you'd like to see happen, certainly with our friends from Acamus and Performetrics. Certainly love to delve deeper with you. But if there's no further questions or comments, Again, I want to thank everybody for joining us today and sticking around to the end. And if you're interested to learn more or re-listen to everything that you've heard today, the recording will be available. So thank you
Actually,
again.
Donna, real quick, one quick question came in from Abhishek in the Q&A. And so instead of I'll just chat out there, talk out the answer here real quick. So in application user action analysis, basically when you have application calls, where would the scenario be where two different sessions getting merged? So we won't ever merge user sessions because those are from the perspective of the user. Donna has her interface into Easy Travel or banking.com, and I have my interface into banking.com. So from our user session experience, they will never, to borrow from Ghostbusters, cross the streams, if you will, because our unique traces are going to be unique to us. But when you deal with multiple applications, what you'll see is that applications are an end user interface into the technology stack. So the banking application, for example, but the traces can cross between services. So multiple applications can use common services down at the bottom tier, common databases, common mainframes, et cetera. So you will see pure paths mixing and crossing in the ether, if you will, underneath the scenes. But from a pure end user session perspective, no, Donna's traffic stays specific to Donna, regardless what application she's in, as do mine stay with me.